The stagecoach wheel struck a hidden rock with a crack so violent it rattled Katherine O'Brien's teeth. She gripped the worn leather handles of her carpet bag, her knuckles white as the brutal Montana wind of December 1885 whistled through the gaps in the coach's wooden walls. Outside, the territory stretched away like a frozen, petrified ocean, an endless expanse of white under a slate-gray sky. Her stomach growled a low guttural sound loud enough to draw a glance from the only other passenger. The man, wrapped in a fine wool suit that seemed to mock the cold, looked at her with an expression of mild pity before returning his gaze to the pristine pages of his newspaper. Katherine's cheeks burned a heat that had nothing to do with warmth. She hadn't eaten since the morning before, and the last of her coins, carefully saved for months, had been spent on this jarring, bumpy ride to what felt like the edge of the world. The newspaper advertisement, now crinkled and soft in her sweaty palm, felt like the only real thing she owned. Cook needed. Cedar Creek Ranch. Fair wages. Inquire J. Thorne. Fair wages. The words were a prayer. Fair wages meant survival. And survival meant she wouldn't freeze to death in some forgotten alley, a fate she'd seen befall too many folks back in Chicago after the Great Fire had devoured her world, turning everything she knew to ash and smoke. The memory, sharp and acrid, still made her throat tighten. The roar of it, the heat of it. It was a ghost that had chased her halfway across the country. Cedar Creek Ranch coming up. The driver's voice boomed from outside, muffled by the wind. Katherine's heart, a frantic bird, hammered against her ribs. What if they don't want me? What if I'm not good enough? The man in the fancy suit began to gather his belongings. Clearly a man of importance, heading somewhere just as important. She, on the other hand, had one tattered carpet bag and a silent, desperate prayer. The coach lurched to a halt. Through the small, grimy window, she saw a cluster of wooden buildings, smoke curling from a stone chimney, like a friendly hand beckoning her forward. Men in heavy coats and worn hats moved with purpose, their figures dark against the snow as they loaded wagons and mended fences. This was it, her new life or her final mistake. She stepped down onto the frozen, unforgiving ground. Her thin boots, no match for a Montana winter, crunched on the packed snow. The cold bit through her threadbare coat like a pack of hungry wolves. The driver, without a word, tossed her bag down. She caught it just before it landed in a patch of muddy slush. "Good luck, miss," he said, already, climbing back to his perch, his face indifferent. "You'll need it out here." As the stagecoach rumbled away, leaving deep ruts in the snow, Katherine felt an overwhelming sense of isolation. She was a tiny, insignificant figure in a vast, indifferent landscape. Taking a deep breath that stung her lungs, she picked up her bag and walked toward the largest of the buildings, the one with the welcoming smoke. This was the main ranch house, she presumed. The door was heavy oak, and she had to put her shoulder into it to push it open. Warmth hit her face like a gentle slap. The scent of wood smoke, strong coffee, and worn leather filled the air. A great stone fireplace crackled and spat its orange flames, dancing a welcome. Behind a large, imposing desk sat a man with hair the color of silver and deep lines etched around his eyes. He didn't look up from his papers. "You must be the cook," he said, his voice a low baritone. "Yes, sir. Katherine O'Brien. I came about the job." Only then did he raise his eyes. They were a sharp, intelligent blue, and they studied her with the same intensity a man might use when inspecting a horse he was considering buying. "You're smaller than I expected. Can you handle feeding 30 hungry cowboys day in and day out?" The memory of 16-hour days in the sweltering hotel kitchen in Chicago flashed through her mind. "I can handle anything you put in front of me, sir." For the first time, a small smile touched the corners of the man's mouth. "We'll see about that. I'm Jay Thorne. This is my ranch." He gestured with his chin toward a younger man standing by the window who had been watching them in silence. "Marcus will show you around." Katherine turned. The first thing she noticed were his eyes. They were the green of the forest in summer, and they held a surprising kindness. A well-worn cowboy hat sat on his head, and though he was about her age, maybe a few years older, there was a quiet confidence in his posture. His hands, though calloused from work, looked strong and capable. He moved with a sort of gentle grace that immediately put her at ease. "Welcome to Cedar Creek, Miss O'Brien," Marcus said. His voice was warm like the coffee she could smell brewing. "Let me help you get settled." He took her bag from her, lifting it as if it weighed nothing, and led her back out into the biting cold. Snow crunched under their boots as they walked, the sound crisp in the still air. They passed corrals filled with horses, magnificent animals that snorted and stamped their breath, creating white clouds in the freezing air. "The cookhouse is just over here," Marcus said, pointing to a long, low building with windows glowing a welcoming yellow in the fading afternoon light. "You'll have your own room attached to the kitchen." He led her up a short flight of wooden steps to a heavy door. The cookhouse was vast, larger than her entire apartment back in Chicago had been. A huge black cast-iron stove dominated one wall, an intimidating beast with pots and pans of all sizes hanging from hooks like sleeping bats. Long, sturdy wooden tables stretched across the room, and she could easily imagine them filled with 30 loud, hungry men. "The pantries are through there," Marcus said, opening a door to reveal shelves lined with tin sacks of flour and hanging sides of cured beef. "Mr. Thorne believes in feeding his men well. Happy cowboys work harder than hungry ones." Her room was adjacent to the kitchen. It was small, Spartan, but spotlessly clean. A narrow bed sat beneath a window that looked out over the horse corrals. A simple wooden dresser and a washstand with a pitcher and bowl completed the furniture. It wasn't much, but it was hers. It was safe. "Dinner's at 6, Marcus said from the doorway. He leaned against the frame, his presence filling the small space. "The men will be hungry after working in this cold all day. Think you can manage something hot?" Katherine nodded, her mind already racing, cataloging the ingredients she'd seen in the pantry. She had learned to cook from her mother, a woman who could weave magic from the simplest of things: a handful of herbs, a tough cut of meat, a few potatoes. "I'll have something ready," she said, with more confidence than she felt. After Marcus left, she unpacked her few belongings. At the very bottom of her bag, wrapped carefully in her only spare dress, was her mother's wooden spoon. The wood was dark and smooth, worn down by years of use. She held it tight, its familiar shape a comfort in her hand. "A woman who can feed people well will never want for a home," her mother used to say. Now she had to prove those words true. She rolled up her sleeves, tied on an apron, and got to work. She coaxed a fire to life in the belly of the giant stove, the warmth seeping into her cold, numbed hands. For the first time in months, a fragile sense of hope began to flicker within her. Outside, she could hear the distant sounds of the cowboys, their voices carrying on the wind as they finished their day's work. Soon they would come inside, cold and tired and ravenous. Katherine smiled as she began peeling potatoes, the rhythmic scrape of the knife. A familiar, soothing sound. She might not have much, but she had this. She knew how to make people happy with food. The sun was setting over the distant snow-capped mountains, painting the sky in breathtaking shades of pink and orange. Through her small window, she watched Marcus helping another cowboy fix a broken fence post. He worked with a quiet, focused skill, his movements efficient and sure. She found herself wondering about his story. What brought him to this remote, frozen corner of the world? Did he have family somewhere, or was he as alone as she was? These questions would have to wait. Right now, she had hungry men to feed and a new life to begin. The next morning came too early and far too cold. Katherine woke to the sound of heavy boots stomping on the porch outside her door, and men's voices calling to each other in the pre-dawn gloom. Her breath made white puffs in the frigid air as she hurried to light the stove and start breakfast. "Hope the new cook ain't going to poison us," said a gruff voice from just outside her wall. "Can't be worse than Jake's cooking." Another man laughed. "Remember when he burned the beans so bad we had to throw out the whole pot?" Katherine smiled to herself as she cracked eggs into a massive iron pan. She would show them. She would show them all. By the time the cowboys filed in, stamping snow from their boots, the cookhouse smelled like a sliver of heaven. Mountains of fluffy biscuits, sizzling platters of crispy bacon, and a small lake of scrambled eggs generously studded with cheese filled the serving dishes. The men sat down without much talk, their faces etched with the fatigue of early morning chores in the bitter cold. But as they took their first bites, a different kind of quiet fell over the room. Forks paused midair. Eyes widened. Then came the sounds she had been hoping for, happy, appreciative groans and the energetic scraping of plates. "This is the best breakfast I've had in years," said an older cowboy with magnificent gray whiskers. "Ma'am, if you can cook like this every day, you'll never lack for friends here," added a younger man with kind eyes and a shock of red hair. Katherine felt her heart lift. A genuine warmth spread through her chest, chasing away the last of the morning chill. These men, rough and weathered as they were, appreciated good food. And that was something she could give them. Maybe, just maybe, this job would work out after all. After breakfast, the cowboys headed out. With full bellies and something close to smiles on their faces. Katherine cleaned up the mountain of dishes and began planning lunch. She was wiping down the long tables when Marcus appeared in the doorway, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "That was some meal," he said, his green eyes crinkling at the corners. "The men are already talking about it. I'm glad they liked it. Food should make people happy." Marcus sat down at one of the tables and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. "I help Mr. Thorne keep track of supplies." "What do you need from town?" Katherine thought for a moment, her professional instincts taking over. More flour, definitely. Some spices, cinnamon, nutmeg. And maybe some apples if they have any. The men would like a pie. "I'll add those to the list." Marcus wrote carefully, his handwriting surprisingly neat and precise. "You know," he said, not looking up, "most of the cowboys here haven't had a woman's cooking in years. Some of them looked ready to cry with joy during breakfast. Where did they eat before I came? Jake took turns with a few others. They did their best, but—" Marcus grinned, a slow, charming smile that made her stomach flutter. "Let's just say your biscuits are a significant improvement." Katherine found herself smiling back. There was something about Marcus that made her feel comfortable, as if she could tell him anything. Yet, at the same time, she sensed a wall around him, a quiet reserve that he kept between himself and the world. He carried himself differently than the other cowboys, with a quiet confidence that seemed almost practiced. "How long have you worked here?" she asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. "About 5 years. Started when I was just a kid." "Really, Mr. Thorne took you in?" "He did, when I had nowhere else to go." "What about your family?" The change in his expression was immediate. The warmth vanished, replaced by a guarded look. The wall was back up. "That's a long story for another time. I should get back to work. The horses need tending." He left so quickly that Katherine was left staring at the empty doorway, wondering what she had said wrong. Everyone has secrets, she supposed. She certainly had her own ghosts of fire and loss that she kept locked away. The morning passed quickly as she prepared a hearty beef stew for lunch. Through the cookhouse window, she watched the cowboys working with the cattle. They moved with an easy, fluid skill, their horses responding to the slightest touch of the reins, a silent conversation between man and beast. It was a world away from the noisy, dirty streets of Chicago. Marcus was often in her line of sight, and she noticed how the other men deferred to him. When a young horse got spooked and bolted toward the fence, it was Marcus who calmed it with a gentle touch and soothing words. When two cowboys had a disagreement about moving a section of the herd, they sought out Marcus to settle it. "He's not just another cowboy," Katherine muttered to herself as she stirred the stew. At lunch, the men filed in with even more enthusiasm than at breakfast. They devoured the stew and thick slices of her fresh-baked bread like they hadn't eaten in days. "Miss Katherine," said the gray-whiskered cowboy. "My name's Pete. I've been working ranches for 30 years, and I ain't never tasted stew this good." "Thank you, Pete. I'm glad you like it." The younger cowboy with bright red hair, Billy, raised his hand like a schoolboy. "My mama used to make stew, but she never made it taste like this." "What's your secret?" Katherine laughed, a genuine happy sound. "No secret, just good ingredients and a little love." The men exchanged grins. One of them, a tall man with a thick mustache, leaned forward. "Miss Katherine, you mind if I ask where you came from? You talk different than folks around here." "I'm from Chicago. I worked in a hotel kitchen before." She paused, not wanting to explain about the fire, about losing everything. "Before I decided to try something new?" "Chicago." Billy's eyes went wide. "That's a big city. Must be quite a change coming out here to the middle of nowhere." "It is different," Katherine admitted, "but I like it. The air is cleaner, and the people are honest." Marcus, who had been eating quietly at the far end of the table, looked up at her words. Their eyes met across the room, and she felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. There was something in his gaze, an understanding. that made her think he knew exactly what she meant about honest people. After lunch, as she was kneading bread dough for dinner, Marcus returned carrying a bucket of fresh milk from the cows. "Thought you might need this for your cooking," he said, setting the bucket on the counter. "Thank you. That's very thoughtful." Marcus lingered, watching her work the dough. His presence was a quiet, solid comfort. "You have good hands for this. I knew someone once who could make bread like that, just by the feel of the dough, knowing exactly when it was ready." "Your mother?" Katherine asked gently. Marcus looked away, his gaze distant. "Something like that. I should let you work. Dinner won't make itself." But he didn't leave. Instead, he sat at the table, a silent observer. "Marcus," she said, shaping the dough into loaves, "can I ask you something?" "Sure." "The other men, they look to you for decisions. They ask your opinion. That's not normal for a regular cowboy, is it?" Marcus was quiet for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "I've been here longer than most. Mr. Thorne trusts me with extra responsibilities." It was a reasonable answer, but Katherine sensed it was an incomplete one. Marcus had keys to buildings the other cowboys didn't. He kept the supply ledgers. He settled disputes. There was an air of command about him that reminded her of the hotel managers she used to work for, people who were used to being in charge. "What kind of responsibilities?" she pressed gently. Marcus stood up abruptly, a flicker of discomfort in his eyes. "I really should get back to work. The horses need to be fed before dark." He left again, and Katherine stared at the door where he had disappeared. Marcus Brennan was hiding something important. She was sure of it. But what and why did it matter so much to her? She finished shaping the bread and put it in the oven to rise. Outside, the sun was sinking, and soon the men would return. She had work to do, a new life to build. Whatever secrets Marcus was keeping would have to wait. But as she prepared the evening meal, she couldn't shake the feeling that understanding Marcus was the key to understanding her own place at Cedar Creek Ranch. A scream, sharp and terrified, cut through the crisp morning air like a knife. Katherine dropped the coffee pot she was holding, its contents splashing across the wooden floor, and ran outside. In the main corral, a wild-eyed Mustang was bucking and kicking, a whirlwind of furious muscle. Clinging desperately to its back was young Billy, his face a mask of white-knuckled terror. "Get off him, Billy," Pete shouted from the safety of the fence. "That horse ain't ready." But Billy couldn't get off. His boot was caught fast in the stirrup. With every violent twist of the horse, Billy's head snapped back and forth like a rag doll's. The other cowboys were scrambling up the fence, shouting advice, but they were powerless to get close without risking a fatal kick. Then Marcus appeared. He seemed to come from nowhere, moving with a speed and grace that was startling. He didn't hesitate. In one fluid motion, he vaulted over the top rail of the fence and landed softly in the churning dust of the corral. He didn't approach the horse head-on. Instead, he moved in a calm, deliberate arc, grabbing the horse's bridle. The Mustang reared up on its hind legs, its powerful body towering over Marcus, a mountain of fury. "Easy, boy," Marcus said, his voice so calm and low it seemed to possess a magic of its own. "Easy now. Nobody's going to hurt you." The horse's ears, which had been pinned back in anger, twitched forward. Its frantic breathing began to slow. Impossibly, the wild animals started to settle. Marcus kept talking, a constant soothing murmur, his hands gentle but firm on the horse's neck. Within moments, the Mustang stood still, trembling, but subdued, its sides heaving. Pete and Jake rushed in to help Billy down. The young cowboy was shaking, pale but blessedly alive. "Thanks, Marcus," Billy gasped, leaning heavily on Pete. "That horse, it nearly killed me." "That's what happens when you try to ride a horse that isn't ready," Marcus said, his voice firm but not unkind. "You could have broken your neck." Katherine watched the entire scene with her mouth agape. She had never seen anything like it. It was as if Marcus spoke a language the animals understood. But what surprised her even more was the reaction of the other cowboys. They weren't just grateful. They were deeply, profoundly impressed, looking at Marcus with a kind of respect usually reserved for a boss, not a peer. "How did you do that?" she asked him later as they walked back toward the cookhouse. Marcus shrugged, a faint smile on his lips. "Horses are a lot like people. They just want to be understood. But you made it look so easy, like you've done it 1,000 times before." "Maybe I have." His green eyes twinkled with something that might have been amusement. "There's a lot you don't know about me, Katherine O'Brien." "I'm starting to figure that out," she replied softly. That afternoon, Katherine was in the pantry counting sacks of flour when she heard voices just outside the window. She wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the men were talking loudly enough that she couldn't help but overhear. "Marcus sure handled that Mustang," Jake was saying. "Reminded me of his father." "Shh." Pete's voice was a harsh hiss. "You know we ain't supposed to talk about that." "Why not? It's been 5 years. The boy's proven himself 10 times over. Mr. Thorne has his reasons for keeping things quiet. It ain't our business to gossip." Katherine pressed closer to the pantry wall, her heart pounding. What weren't they supposed to talk about? What did Jake mean? He reminded him of his father. Still seems strange to me. Jake continued, his voice lower now. Living like a regular cowboy when he could be living in the big house. Jake, shut your mouth before someone hears you. Their voices moved away, leaving Katherine in the dusty silence of the pantry with a storm of questions raging in her mind. Living in the big house, Mr. Thorne lived in the main ranch house alone. Why would Marcus, a simple cowboy, be able to live there? She tried to focus on her work, but it was impossible. Every small, puzzling detail about Marcus suddenly clicked into a larger, more confusing picture. The way he carried himself, the deference the other cowboys showed him, the keys he had to buildings she couldn't access, the careful, evasive way he talked about his past. That evening after dinner, she decided to seek answers. When the cowboys had retired to the bunkhouse, she gathered her courage, walked across the frozen yard, and knocked on the heavy oak door of the main ranch house. Mr. Thorne answered, a look of surprise on his face. "Miss Katherine, is everything all right? Do you need something for the kitchen?" "No, sir. I was wondering if I could ask you a question about Marcus." Mr. Thorne's expression shifted to friendly lines around his eyes, hardening into a guarded mask. "What about him? He seems different from the other cowboys. The men look up to him in a special way. I was just curious about his background." "Marcus is a good worker, a hard worker. That's all you need to know?" "But sir, I heard one of the men mention his father." "You heard wrong." Mr. Thorne's voice was suddenly as sharp as shattered ice. Marcus is just another cowboy, Miss Katherine. I suggest you focus on your cooking and leave the ranch gossip to others." He closed the door firmly in her face, leaving Katherine standing on the porch feeling foolish and confused. Why was everyone so fiercely protective of this secret? What were they all hiding? She walked back to her small room, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Marcus standing fearlessly before that raging Mustang, his voice a calm anchor in a storm of chaos. She thought about the sudden cold anger in Mr. Thorne's face. She replayed Jake's words over and over in her mind, living in the big house. Reminded me of his father. Near midnight, she gave up on sleep. She went to the kitchen to make herself some warm milk, hoping it would soothe her racing thoughts. Through the kitchen window, she could see a single light burning in the main house in a side room that looked like an office or study. Someone else was awake. Without a clear plan, moved by an irresistible curiosity, Katherine put on her coat and boots and slipped outside. The night was achingly clear and cold. The stars scattered across the black velvet sky like spilled diamonds. She moved quietly, a shadow among shadows drawn toward the light. She crept closer to the side of the house, feeling a pang of guilt but unable to stop herself. Through the glass, she could see Mr. Thorne sitting at his desk, papers spread out before him. And he wasn't alone. Marcus sat across from him. They were talking, their expressions serious and intent. Katherine couldn't hear their words, but she could see the weight of their conversation. Mr. Thorne looked tired, burdened. Marcus looked determined, leaning forward as if trying to convince the older man of something important. Then Mr. Thorne reached across the desk and placed his hand on Marcus's shoulder. It wasn't the gesture of a boss to an employee. It was a gesture of deep affection, of pride. It was the gesture of a father. Marcus nodded, saying something that made Mr. Thorne smile, a sad, weary smile. Katherine's heart began to race, a frantic, pounding drum in her chest. The scattered pieces of the puzzle were slamming together in her mind, forming a picture so impossible, so outlandish, she didn't want to believe it. She backed away from the window, her mind reeling, and hurried back to the sanctuary of her room. But as she lay in bed staring at the dark ceiling, one thought echoed over and over again, louder than the howling wind. What if Marcus wasn't just another cowboy? What if he was something much, much more? The letter arrived with the morning supply wagon, and it changed everything. Katherine was hanging laundry, the stiff, frozen sheets crackling in the wind, when she saw the delivery man hand a fancy cream-colored envelope to Mr. Thorne. The older man's face went pale as he read it. He immediately turned and called for Marcus, his voice tight with urgency. "We need to talk," Mr. Thorne said grimly. "In private." They disappeared into the main house, leaving Katherine with a sick, cold feeling in the pit of her stomach. Fancy letters rarely brought good news, and from the look on Mr. Thorne's face, this was the worst kind of trouble. An hour later, Marcus emerged from the house. He looked like he'd been punched. His usual calm, steady expression was gone, replaced by something Katherine had never seen on his face before, a volatile mix of raw fear and burning anger. He walked straight to the barn without speaking a word to anyone. "What's wrong with Marcus?" Billy asked as the cowboys gathered for lunch. He looked ready to fight a grizzly. "Probably nothing," Pete said quickly, But Katherine could see the deep worry etched in the older man's eyes. Whatever was in that letter, it wasn't nothing. She spent the afternoon trying to concentrate on her cooking, but her mind kept wandering to Marcus. She hadn't seen him since he'd stormed into the barn. When dinner time came and he still hadn't appeared, she wiped her hands on her apron, made a plate of stew and fresh bread, and resolved to find him. The barn was dim and quiet, filled with the gentle rhythmic sounds of horses eating their hay. She found Marcus in the last stall, brushing a black mare with hard mechanical strokes. His shoulders were rigid with tension, and he didn't look up as she approached. "You missed dinner?" she said softly. "Wasn't hungry." "Marcus, what's wrong? Everyone's worried about you." He finally stopped and looked at her. The pain in his green eyes made her heart ache. "You want to know what's wrong, Katherine? My whole life is about to be ripped apart, and there's not a damn thing I can do to stop it." "What do you mean?" Marcus set down the brush and leaned heavily against the stall door. "That letter today. It was from a lawyer. In Denver. It seems my father's brother has decided he wants to claim his share of the ranch." Katherine was confused. "Your father's brother? But what does that have to do with you?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Because my father is Jay Thorne. This is my family's ranch, Katherine, and I'm supposed to inherit it someday. But now my uncle is saying he has a legal right to half of everything." The words hit Katherine like a physical blow. She stared at him, her mind struggling to process what he'd just said. "Mr. Thorne is your father?" "Yes." "But why didn't you tell me? Why does everyone act like it's some kind of state secret?" Marcus ran a hand through his hair in a gesture of pure frustration. "Because 5 years ago, when I turned 18, my father, he decided I needed to learn the ranch business from the ground up. He wanted me to work alongside the men to earn their respect, to understand their lives before I ever took over. So we agreed. We agreed to keep my identity quiet until I had proven myself. You've been pretending to be a regular cowboy for 5 years. "It wasn't pretending," he said fiercely. "I did the work. I learned the skills. I earned the men's respect on my own, not because of my name. But now," he gestured helplessly at the empty air, "now my Uncle Robert is threatening to take it all away." Katherine sank down onto a bale of hay, her legs suddenly weak. It all made sense now. The respect the cowboys showed him, the keys he carried, the way he moved through the ranch with a quiet, confident authority. He wasn't just a cowboy, he was the prince in hiding. "What does your uncle want? Money, land, power," Marcus said bitterly. "He's been living in San Francisco, spending his inheritance on gambling and bad investments. Now he's broke, and he suddenly remembered that his dear older brother owns a very successful ranch. But can he really take it legally?" Marcus's laugh was a harsh, empty sound. "That's what we're trying to figure out. The lawyer says Robert might have a case. Apparently our grandfather's will was unclear about some things." Katherine felt a strange mix of emotions. She was angry at him for the deception, for lying to her all this time. But beneath the anger was a deep, aching sadness for him. She could see how much this ranch meant to him. It wasn't just land, it was part of his very soul. "So, what happens now?" "Robert is coming here next week with his lawyers. If he can prove his claim, He could force us to sell the ranch and split the money. Or, Marcus's voice grew darker, he might try to become a partner, which would be even worse. Why would that be worse? Because Robert Thorne is a selfish, cruel man who cares nothing for this land or the people who work it. He'd sell off pieces of the ranch to developers, fire half the cowboys, and run this place into the ground within a year. Katherine thought of Pete, Billy, and Jake. She thought of all the good, hard-working men who depended on this ranch for their livelihood. There has to be something you can do. My father's been fighting this for months through letters and lawyers. But Robert keeps pushing. Now he's bringing in bigger legal guns from San Francisco. Men who know how to twist laws to get what they want. They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the soft shuffling of the horses in their stalls. Finally, Katherine spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." He looked at her, his gaze intent. "All right. What am I to you, really? Am I just the cook who happened to show up at a convenient time, or—" She struggled to find the words. "Or do you see me as something more?" Marcus moved closer, his green eyes searching her face with an intensity that made heat rise in her cheeks. "Katherine, you are the best thing that has happened to this ranch, and to me in years. You're smart and kind and stronger than anyone I know. You've made this place feel like a real home again instead of just a business." "But I'm still just the cook," she whispered. "I'm not part of your world, not really." "My world." Marcus stepped closer still, closing the distance between them. "My world is whatever I make it. And I want you to be part of it, if you'll have me." Her heart began to race. "Even though I'm nobody special, even though I don't come from a fancy family or have money or an education, you are the most special person I know." He said, his voice thick with emotion. "You take care of every single person here like they're your own family. You work harder than anyone and you never complain. And when you smile," Marcus reached out and gently touched her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "When you smile, it's like the sun coming up over the mountains." Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. "I care about you too, Marcus. More than I probably should." "Why shouldn't you?" "Because look at us. You're the son of a wealthy ranch owner, even if you've been hiding it. I'm just a woman who ran away from Chicago with nothing but the clothes on her back. People like us, we don't end up together." "Says who?" he challenged softly. "Says everyone. Says the way the world works." Marcus took both her hands in his grip warm and strong. "Katherine, I don't care what the world says. I care what you say, what we say." Before she could respond, the barn door creaked open and Pete's silhouette appeared. "Marcus, you in here. Your father wants to see you." Marcus squeezed her hands gently. "We'll talk more later," he promised. "But Katherine, don't give up on us before we've even had a chance to start." He left her there, sitting on a bale of hay in the dim, quiet barn, her mind spinning with everything she had learned. Marcus was Jay Thorne's son. The ranch was his inheritance. And somehow, impossibly, he claimed to care for her. But caring and commitment were two very different things. What would happen when his powerful, ruthless uncle arrived with his city lawyers and legal papers? What would happen when Marcus had to fight for his inheritance, for his entire future? Would there be any room in that fight for a runaway cook from Chicago. As she walked back to her room under a sky full of cold, distant stars, she knew one thing for certain. Her quiet, simple life at Cedar Creek Ranch was over. The blizzard hit Cedar Creek Ranch like an angry god, a screaming, swirling vortex of white. Katherine woke to the sound of her window rattling so hard she thought the glass might shatter, and a wind that howled with the fury of a legion of wolves. When she peered outside, she couldn't see the porch rail, let alone the corrals. The world had disappeared into a churning chaos of snow. She dressed quickly and fought her way to the kitchen to start the stove. The Cowboys would need hot food and gallons of coffee to get through a day like this. But when breakfast time came, only half the men straggled in. "Where is everyone?" Katherine asked Pete as he stomped snow from his boots. Pete's face was a grim mask. Marcus took 6 men out before dawn to check on the cattle in the north pasture. That was 4 hours ago. We ain't heard from them since. A cold dread, far colder than the storm, seeped into Katherine's bones. 4 hours in this, shouldn't someone go look for them? Can't see 10 feet in front of your face out there, Jake said, bursting through the door and shaking snow from his coat like a wet dog. We'd just get lost ourselves. Just then, Mr. Thorne entered, his face ashen. "I've organized search parties," he announced, his voice strained. "We can't wait any longer." "That's suicide, JT," Pete argued. "Maybe, but Marcus and those boys could be freezing to death right now. We can't just sit here drinking coffee while they die." Katherine's heart was hammering against her ribs. Marcus was out there, out in that white hell, possibly hurt or lost. The thought of him suffering while she stayed here safe and warm was unbearable. "I'm going with you," she announced. The men in the room stared at her as if she'd grown a second head. "Katherine, no," Mr. Thorne said firmly. "This is not work for a woman. I know these mountains up." She lied, her voice stronger than she felt. "I grew up in Colorado territory before I came here. I've been in storms like this before." "This is Montana," Pete grumbled. "And this storm is worse than anything Colorado ever threw at you." But Katherine was already pulling on her heaviest coat and boots. "Marcus helped me when I needed it. Now I'm going to help him." Jake grabbed her arm gently. "Katherine, you could die out there." "Then I'll die trying to save the man I love." The words tumbled out before she could stop them, hanging in the stunned silence of the cookhouse. Her cheeks burned with a sudden fierce heat. But it was the truth. She did love him. She loved his quiet strength, his hidden kindness, his green eyes that saw more than he let on. Pete stared at her. Then a slow look of understanding dawned on his weathered face. "Well, I'll be," he muttered under his breath. "The cook's in love with the boss's son." "You knew?" Katherine asked, astonished. "We all knew." Pete said, a faint smile touching his lips. "Question is, what are you going to do about it?" "Right now," she said, pulling on her gloves, "I'm going to help find him." 20 minutes later, Katherine was trudging through snow that came up to her knees, tied by a rope to Jake and 2 other cowboys, as they ventured into the white wilderness. The wind was a physical force cutting through her coat like 1,000 tiny knives. She could barely see Jake's back, though he was only a few feet ahead. Their search area was a valley where the cattle sometimes took shelter. She pushed forward, calling Marcus's name until her throat was raw, her hands and feet so cold they felt like blocks of ice. She kept going. Then, over the shriek of the wind, she heard it, faint but unmistakable, the whinny of a horse in distress. Following the sound, she fought her way through drifts that were sometimes waist-deep. And then she found them. In a shallow cave formed by a jumble of fallen rocks, Marcus was sitting with his back against the stone wall, his face pale and his lips blue with cold. 3 other cowboys huddled nearby, their horses standing at the cave entrance, blocking some of the wind. "Marcus!" she cried, scrambling over the rocks. His eyes fluttered open. A weak, incredulous smile touched his lips. "Katherine." "What? What are you doing here?" "Looking for you, you fool." She rushed to his side, her medical training from a hotel, long forgotten, replaced by pure frantic instinct. She felt his forehead. He was burning with fever. "How long have you been here?" "Since the storm got bad. My horse threw me. Lightning spooked him. Think I hurt my leg pretty good." Katherine looked down. His right leg was bent at an unnatural angle, definitely broken. "Why didn't you send someone back for help?" "Couldn't risk it," he rasped. "Storm was too bad. Figured we'd wait it out." Billy, one of the cowboys with him, spoke up. "Miss Katherine, how in the world did you find us? We've been shouting for hours." "I heard your horse." She pulled the thermos of hot coffee she'd brought from her satchel and passed it around. The men drank gratefully, some color returning to their faces. But Marcus was getting worse. His fever was clearly rising, and he was starting to shiver uncontrollably. "We need to get him back to the ranch," Katherine said, her voice taking on an authority that surprised even herself. "That leg needs a doctor, and he's getting sick." "How?" Billy asked. "We can't carry him through this storm." Katherine's mind raced. They had 4 horses, 3 able-bodied men, and 1 severely injured man. The storm still raged. "Billy, can you ride back? Take Tom's horse, it's the strongest. Tell Mr. Thorne where we are." "I can try, but I might get lost." "Follow the rope," Katherine said. "Jake and I left a trail rope. It leads back to the main search area. From there, follow the fence line to the ranch." Billy nodded, his young face set with determination, and disappeared into the swirling snow. Katherine turned her attention back to Marcus. He had slipped into unconsciousness. His breathing was shallow, his skin clammy. She recognized the signs of shock and infection. "Tom, help me make him more comfortable. We have to keep him warm." They used saddle blankets to create a makeshift bed, covering him with their own coats. Katherine sat beside him, chafing his cold hands, talking to him, even though she knew he couldn't hear her. "You're going to be fine, Marcus Thorne," she whispered fiercely. "We're going to get you home, and you're going to get better. And then you are going to explain to me why you thought it was a good idea to ride out into a blizzard." Hours crawled by. The storm showed signs of weakening, but Marcus's condition worsened. His fever climbed, and he began to talk in his sleep, muttering about cattle and lawyers and losing the ranch. He's really worried about that uncle of his. Tom observed quietly from the other side of the small cave. "What do you know about it?" Katherine asked. "Just that the man's been causing trouble. Mr. Thorne's been getting letters from lawyers for months. Some of the boys think we might all lose our jobs if this Robert fellow gets his way." A chill that had nothing to do with the cold ran down Katherine's spine. If Marcus lost the ranch, what would happen to all of them? What would happen to her? But those were worries for another time. All that mattered now was getting Marcus home alive. As darkness fell, they finally heard voices calling through the wind. A search party led by Mr. Thorne himself had found them. The older man took one look at his son, and all the color drained from his face. "How bad is he?" he asked Katherine, his voice trembling. "The leg is broken and he has a high fever. He needs a doctor, right away." "The doctor's already at the ranch waiting. Let's get him home." They loaded Marcus onto a makeshift stretcher and began the slow, arduous journey back. Katherine walked beside him the entire way, holding his hand, her mind a silent loop of prayers. When they finally stumbled into the lamp-lit warmth of the ranch yard, Marcus was carried immediately into the main house. Katherine started to follow, but Mr. Thorne stopped her, placing a hand on her arm. "Miss Katherine," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears, "I can't thank you enough for what you did today. Finding him, staying with him. You may have saved his life." "I love him," Katherine said simply, meeting the older man's gaze. "I couldn't do anything else." Mr. Thorne studied her face in the flickering lamplight, and a look of deep understanding passed between them. "I believe you do," he said softly. "The question is, what are you prepared to do about it?" Before Katherine could answer, the doctor appeared in the doorway. "He's going to be fine," he announced. "The leg will heal and the fever is already starting to break. He's a strong young man." The doctor smiled. "And he's asking for someone named Katherine." Katherine's heart soared. He was alive, and he was asking for her. In that moment, nothing else mattered. The sound of carriage wheels on gravel woke Katherine from the deepest sleep she'd had in days. Through her window, she saw a fancy black carriage polished to a high sheen pull up to the main house. It was drawn by 4 perfectly matched black horses. A man in an expensive city suit stepped down, followed by 2 other men carrying leather briefcases that screamed of legal authority. Uncle Robert had arrived, and he'd brought his lawyers. Katherine dressed quickly and hurried to the main house. She found Marcus sitting up in bed, his broken leg propped up on a mountain of pillows. His face was still pale, but his green eyes were alert and blazing with anger as he watched the commotion outside. "They're early," he said, his voice a low growl. "Robert said he'd be here next week." "Maybe that's for the best," Katherine said, trying to sound hopeful. "Get it over with quickly." "Nothing about Robert Thorne is good, Katherine. The man's like a snake. Smooth on the outside, poison on the inside." Through the window, they watched J. Thorne greet his brother. The handshake was stiff, more like a business deal than a family reunion. Robert was shorter than his brother, but dressed far more extravagantly, with a gold watch chain gleaming on his vest and polished boots that had clearly never seen a day of real work. "He doesn't look like a rancher," Katherine observed. "That's because he's not. Robert spent his whole life in cities, living off the money our grandfather left him. Now that it's gone, he wants half of what my father built with his own 2 hands. A knock on the door interrupted them. Mr. Thorne entered, looking tired and 10 years older. "Marcus, your uncle wants to meet in 1 hour. Are you up to it?" "I'm up to it," Marcus said, his jaw tight. But Katherine stays. "Son, this is family business." "Katherine is family to me." Marcus stated, his gaze unwavering. "If Robert is going to try to take our home, she has a right to be there." Mr. Thorne looked surprised, but then he nodded slowly. "All right, but let me do the talking." The meeting took place in the ranch office, a room lined with leather-bound books and rolled maps. Robert sat behind a huge oak desk as if he already owned it, his two lawyers flanking him like vultures. "Hello, Marcus," Robert said, his smile not reaching his cold, calculating eyes. "I hear you've been playing cowboy for the past few years. How quaint." "Hello, Uncle Robert," Marcus replied, his voice level. "I hear you've been playing gentleman for the past few years. How expensive." Robert's smile tightened. "Always had a smart mouth, didn't you? Well, that's about to change. Gentlemen, if you would." One of the lawyers, a thin man with eyes like chips of flint, opened his briefcase. "It's quite simple, really. Your grandfather's will stated that the ranch should be divided equally between his two sons upon his death. However, your father, Mr. J. Thorne, took control of the entire property and has been running it as his own for 30 years. Because I'm the one who worked this land," Mr. Thorne said, his voice thundering. "Robert took his inheritance in cash and left for California." "That's irrelevant," the lawyer continued smoothly. "According to territorial law, Mr. Robert Thorne has a legitimate claim to 50% of all ranch assets, including land, cattle, and buildings." Katherine felt her heart sink. This sounded so official, so final. It was the kind of legal talk that poor people like her never won against. But Marcus leaned forward, ignoring the pain in his leg. "Show me the will." "I beg your pardon," the lawyer said, taken aback. "The will? I want to see the exact wording of what our grandfather wrote." The lawyers exchanged a nervous glance. "That's not necessary. We have copies of all relevant documents." "Then you won't mind showing me the original?" "Actually, we would mind," Robert said, his voice hardening. "You're hardly qualified to interpret legal documents, nephew. You're just a ranch hand who happens to share our name." "I'm a ranch hand who can read oak," Marcus shot back, "and I know my rights." Katherine watched a surge of admiration flowing through her. Even injured and outnumbered, he wasn't backing down. He was fighting. "Furthermore," the thin lawyer pressed on, "we've discovered irregularities in how the ranch has been managed. Tax records show profits that were never reported to Mr. Robert Thorne as a rightful partner." "Because he wasn't a partner," Mr. Thorne roared. "He gave up any claim when he took his inheritance and left." "The law says otherwise." The lawyer smirked. "The law says a lot of things," Marcus said, struggling to his feet with the help of a crutch. "But this ranch was built by my father's sweat and blood. Every building, every fence, every head of cattle represents years of hard work that Robert never once participated in." "Sentiment is touching, Marcus, but it doesn't change legal facts," Robert said coolly. "I am, however, willing to be generous. I will give you 30 days to arrange the sale of the property. We'll split the proceeds 50-50, and everyone can move on with their lives." "And what about the cowboys who work here?" Katherine asked, finding her voice. "What about their families?" Robert shrugged, a gesture of supreme indifference. "Not my problem. They can find work somewhere else." Katherine saw a flash of red rage in Marcus's eyes. These men were talking about destroying the lives of dozens of good people as if they were discussing the weather. "There is another option," the thin lawyer said. "Mr. Robert Thorne could become a full partner in the ranch operations. He would move here and take an active role in management. "Over my dead body," Marcus said flatly. "That might not be necessary." Robert smiled, a truly chilling sight. "You see, nephew, I've been doing some research. The first thing any good manager does is cut unnecessary expenses. Like, for instance, employing 30 cowboys when 15 would do the job. Like maintaining a full-time cook when the men could very well prepare their own meals." Katherine felt as if she'd been slapped. He was threatening her job, her home, her entire life with Marcus. "You can't do that?" she said, her voice shaking with anger. Robert finally looked at her, as if noticing a bug on his pristine suit. "And you are Katherine O'Brien. I'm the cook." "Ah, yes, the help. Well, Miss O'Brien, I can and I will do whatever I want. This will be my ranch soon." "Actually, it won't." A new voice, calm and authoritative, came from the doorway. Everyone turned. An elderly man with a kind face and a neatly trimmed white beard stood there. He carried a worn leather satchel and walked with the confidence of someone who was used to being listened to. Judge Morrison. "Mr. Thorne said, standing up in relief. "What brings you all the way out here?" "Your telegram, JT. I came as soon as I could." The judge's sharp eyes surveyed the room, settling on Robert and his lawyers. "I understand there's some question about property rights." "Your Honor," the thin lawyer said smoothly, "this is a private family matter." "Not anymore, it isn't," Judge Morrison replied, setting his satchel on the desk. "You see, gentlemen, I was present when old Thomas Thorne wrote his will. I was his lawyer at the time before I became a judge. And I have a very, very clear memory of what that document actually says." Katherine felt a fragile flower of hope bloom in her chest. "I'd be very interested to see this will you're using as the basis for your claim." The judge continued, his gaze sharp as a hawk's. "Because the one I helped write says something quite different from what you've described." For the first time since he arrived, Robert's confident smile began to fade. He looked nervous, and Katherine began to think that maybe, just maybe, love and truth and a lifetime of hard work might be stronger than greed and lies after all. But she could see from the lawyers' panicked faces that this fight was far from over. The document Robert's lawyer produced crumbled under Judge Morrison's expert fingers, flaking apart like old dry leaves. "This is a forgery," the judge declared, his voice ringing with judicial authority. "And a clumsy one at that." Robert's face went as white as fresh snow. The thin lawyer began stuffing papers back into his briefcase, his hands shaking. "Gentlemen," Judge Morrison said, his calm voice more terrifying than a shout, "forging legal documents is a serious crime in Montana territory. I suggest you leave this ranch immediately before I decide to have you arrested." Robert jumped up so fast his chair toppled backward. "This isn't over, brother. I'll find another way to get what's mine." "You already got what was yours 30 years ago," Mr. Thorne replied wearily. "You spent it all." The lawyers scrambled for the door like scared rabbits. But Robert turned back at the doorway, his eyes burning with a venomous hatred. "Enjoy your little victory, Marcus. But remember, accidents happen on ranches. People get hurt. Sometimes they just disappear altogether." The threat hung in the air, thick and poisonous. That evening, as Katherine was in the kitchen, she heard the frantic drumming of hooves. Through the window, she saw Pete and Jake riding hard toward the main house, their faces grim. She ran outside to meet them. What's wrong? Someone cut the fence on the south pasture, Pete said, sliding from his horse. Let about 200 head of cattle loose. They're scattered all over creation. Could have been an accident, Jake added, but his tone said he didn't believe it. No accident cuts fence wire that clean, Pete retorted. This was done on purpose. Marcus appeared on the porch leaning on his crutch. How many men do we need to round them up? Every man we got, and it'll still take 3 days, Pete said. Problem is, some of those cattle wandered onto government land. If we don't get them back quick, the territorial marshal might confiscate them for trespassing. Anger burned in Katherine's chest. This had Robert's fingerprints all over it. He couldn't steal the ranch legally, so now he was trying to destroy it piece by piece. I'll help, she declared. Marcus shook his head. Katherine, cattle drives are dangerous. You could get hurt. I can ride as well as any man here, she insisted, her chin set stubbornly. You need every hand you can get. She's right, Pete said, nodding at Marcus. We're short-handed as it is. The next morning, Katherine found herself on horseback, riding beside Tom and 2 other cowboys. They spent hours chasing stubborn cows through thorny brush and over rocky terrain. Her back ached. Her hands were raw from the reins, but she kept going. This was for Marcus. This was for their future. Around noon, they stopped to rest near Miller's Creek. But as they approached the water, a horrifying sight met their eyes. The creek was full of dead fish floating belly up in water that had an unnatural oily sheen. Someone's poisoned the water, Tom said, his voice a horrified whisper. Pete's face went hard as stone. If our cattle drink from this, they'll die. Every last one of them. They spent the rest of the day in a frantic race against time, driving the thirsty cattle away from the poisoned creek. By evening, they had saved most of the herd, but everyone was exhausted and on edge. This ain't just about money anymore, Pete said, as they rode back to the ranch under a bruised twilight sky. Somebody's trying to destroy us completely. That night, a stranger with a tin star pinned to his shirt rode into the ranch. It was Marshal Patterson. He had come to arrest Marcus. For cattle theft, the marshal said, tipping his hat apologetically. What? Katherine gasped, running from the cookhouse. That's ridiculous. I'm sorry, folks, but I got a complaint filed this morning. Says Marcus Thorne stole cattle from the government range and tried to hide them on private property. Those are our cattle, Mr. Thorne protested. Someone cut our fence. That may be, but I got 3 witnesses who say otherwise. I got to follow the law. Marcus needs to come with me to town for questioning. Katherine watched in horror as Marcus, his face a mask of grim resignation, gathered his coat. His broken leg made it hard for him to walk, but he faced the marshal with an unshakable dignity. As they loaded him into the marshal's wagon, he caught her eye. Take care of things while I'm gone, he said quietly, his voice for her alone. And watch yourself, Katherine. If someone's willing to frame me for theft, they might try something worse. Tears stung her eyes as the wagon rolled away, disappearing into the darkness. First the fence, then the poison, now false charges. Someone was playing a deadly game and they were winning. But as she stood there in the cold watching the dust settle, Katherine made a decision. She might be just a cook from Chicago, but she would not let anyone destroy the people she loved without a fight. The next morning she saddled Daisy and rode to town, alone. She was determined to find out who was behind these attacks and make them pay. The saloon in Cedar Falls was a den of smoke and shadows, filled with men whose faces told stories of hard luck and bad choices. Katherine stood outside the swinging doors, her heart pounding. This was no place for a lady. But right now, she wasn't feeling much like a lady. She was a woman on a mission. She pushed through the doors. Every conversation stopped. 24 pairs of eyes stared. "Lady, you lost," the fat bartender grunted. "I'm looking for information," Katherine said, her voice surprisingly steady. "About who's been hiring men to cause trouble for the Thorn Ranch." The saloon erupted in laughter. "Hear that, boys? The little lady wants to play detective, but not everyone was laughing." In a dark back corner, Katherine spotted a familiar, chilling face, one of Robert's lawyers, the thin man with the cold eyes. He was sitting with 3 rough-looking men, and they were all staring at her with expressions that made her skin crawl. "Miss O'Brien," the lawyer said, standing up slowly. "What a surprise." "I bet it is," Katherine replied, stepping forward. "Especially since you're supposed to be halfway back to San Francisco." The lawyer's smile was the kind a snake might make before striking. "My client decided to extend our stay. We're exploring other business opportunities." "You mean you're paying criminals to destroy the Thorn Ranch?" "That's a serious accusation." "Do you have any proof?" Her heart hammered, but she held her ground. "I have enough proof to get Marshal Patterson very interested in your activities." "I doubt that." "You see, the marshal is currently busy with your boyfriend." One of the rough men leaned forward. "Boss want me to handle this fear-colded sharp," pricked at her. But she forced herself to stay calm. Handle what? An innocent woman asking questions. That would look very suspicious, wouldn't it? She raised her voice, making sure everyone in the saloon could hear. "I want all these witnesses to know that if anything happens to me, you'll be the first people Marshal Patterson investigates." It was a bluff, but a smart one. The other men in the saloon might be criminals, but they didn't want the law coming down on them for violence against a woman. The lawyer's jaw tightened. "You're very clever, Miss O'Brien, but cleverness can only protect you for so long. Tell your boss," Katherine said, backing toward the door, "that the Thorns aren't as helpless as he thinks. And tell him that some of us know how to fight dirty, too." She made it outside, her hands shaking as she untied Daisy. She had what she needed, confirmation, but she'd also made some very dangerous enemies. When she got back and told Mr. Thorn, his face went pale. "Katherine, you could have been killed. We can tell the marshal it won't matter," she said, her voice heavy with a grim new understanding of how the world worked. "Robert's too smart. He's paying other people to do his dirty work. They'll never talk. There's no proof." That evening, as she was wearily preparing dinner, Billy burst into the cookhouse, his face white with panic. "Miss Katherine, come quick. There's a fire." She ran outside. Orange flames were dancing against the night sky, coming from the direction of the south pasture. "It's the hay barn," Pete yelled, running past with buckets. "Someone set fire to our winter feed." They fought the blaze for hours, a desperate, hopeless bucket brigade against a raging inferno. By morning, the hay barn was nothing but a pile of smoking, blackened ruins. "He's not just trying to steal the ranch anymore," Mr. Thorn said, staring at the devastation. "He's trying to destroy it." They were fighting an enemy who hid in shadows, an enemy with money and no morals. How could honest people win against that? But as she looked at the tired, worried, but determined faces around her, an idea began to form in Catherine's mind. A dangerous, risky idea. "Mr. Thorne," she said quietly, "what if we stop playing defense and start playing offense?" "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said, her eyes glinting with a fire of their own, "what if we set a trap for Uncle Robert? Make him think he's won, and then catch him in the act of doing something we can prove." Mr. Thorne looked at her with new respect. "That's a dangerous game, Catherine. If it goes wrong, we could lose everything." "We're going to lose everything anyway if we don't do something," she replied. "At least this way, we have a chance." As the sun rose over the smoking ruins of their hay barn, a plan began to take shape. A plan that would either save Cedar Creek Ranch or destroy it completely. But first, they had to get Marcus out of jail. The jail cell door slammed shut with a sound of finality, and Marcus felt his world shrink to iron bars and cold stone. 3 days had passed. Through the small barred window, he could see smoke rising from the direction of Cedar Creek. The sight of it was a physical agony, a testament to his own helplessness. A stranger appeared outside his cell, a tall man in a city lawyer's suit. "Hello, Marcus. I'm James Crawford, representing your Uncle Robert. I think we need to talk. I have nothing to say to you." "Oh, I think you do," Crawford said, sitting on a stool. "Your situation is quite serious. Cattle theft is a hanging offense in Montana." He smiled. "However, my client is prepared to be generous. Drop all claims to the ranch and the charges against you. Disappear. Never. Think carefully. Your father is an old man. Your girlfriend is just a cook. How long can they fight this without you?" Crawford gestured toward the window. "Accidents happen on ranches, Marcus." Marcus gripped the iron bars, his knuckles white. "If you hurt them?" "Such violent talk," Crawford laughed. "That won't help your case at all." That evening, Deputy Miller, an honest man Marcus had known for years, brought him dinner. Deputy Marcus said quietly, "Those witnesses against me. Do you know anything about them?" Miller glanced around. "Ain't supposed to talk about it. But you didn't hear this from me. All 3 have criminal records. And all 3 suddenly came into a lot of money last week. New clothes paying off old debts. Someone paid them to lie." A spark of hope ignited in Marcus's chest. The next morning, Billy appeared looking nervous. "Miss Catherine sent a message," he whispered. "She says to tell you that the wildcats are hunting tonight, and the moon will be dark." It was a code from their childhood games. Catherine was planning something dangerous, and she needed him ready. "Tell her I understand," Marcus said, "and Billy, tell her to be careful." That afternoon, Marcus faked a sudden violent illness. Dr. Henderson, an old family friend, was called. He played his part perfectly, declaring Marcus needed a special medicine he had to mix himself at his office. An hour later, he returned not just with medicine, but with a fake telegram. Deputy Miller, the doctor, said loudly, "Message for Marshal Patterson from the territorial governor. Says they have evidence of perjury in the Thorne case." Miller read the fake telegram, his face paling. He rushed off to find the marshal, who conveniently had been called away on urgent business. Near midnight, the jail door creaked open. Catherine slipped inside like a shadow holding a set of keys. How Marcus whispered, his heart leaping. Deputy Miller is visiting his sick aunt tonight, she said with a small triumphant smile. Amazing how many people get sick when there's justice to be done. The town was fighting back. Katherine, this is dangerous. They won't catch me. But we need to hurry. Your uncle's men are planning something terrible tonight. Your father needs help. What kind of terrible? Katherine's face was grim. They're going to burn down the main house, with your father inside. Rage, pure and hot, burned through Marcus. Robert wasn't just trying to steal a ranch anymore. He was trying to commit murder. Then, let's go stop them. As they slipped out into the dark night, Marcus knew this was no longer a fight for property or inheritance. It was a fight for survival. The winner would take everything. The final battle for Cedar Creek Ranch was about to begin. The orange glow on the horizon was a horrifying confirmation. They were already too late. Marcus kicked his horse, racing through the darkness, with Katherine close behind. As they crested the last hill, they could see at the main house a torch against the night sky. And on the porch, a lone figure, his father, was trapped, fighting to get out. "Father," Marcus shouted, jumping from his horse before it had fully stopped. Pete and Jake were already there, throwing useless buckets of water against the inferno. "We tried to get him out?" Pete gasped, his face black with soot. "Someone barred the doors from the outside." "The back window," Katherine cried. "The one in his study?" They ran to the back of the house. Marcus could see his father's shadow moving behind the study window. He was alive. "Father, over here." The window opened. "Marcus, how did you get out? Long story. Can you climb down?" "My leg. Something fell on it. I think it's broken." Just then, Katherine grabbed Marcus's arm. "Wait. Look." Shadowy figures were moving through the trees surrounding the house. At least 6 men, all carrying rifles. Robert's hired guns there to make sure no one escaped the fire alive. "We're trapped," Pete said, his voice grim. Marcus's mind raced. He knew this land, every tree, every rock. "Pete, take Jake's circle around to the barn. Make noise, draw their attention. Katherine, help my father down. I'll handle the gunman." He slipped into the darkness, a predator on his own land. He moved silently, taking out the first gunman with a heavy tree branch. 1 down. He heard his father drop from the window, helped by Katherine. Good. Now he could focus. A gunshot rang out from the barn, Pete and Jake creating their diversion. Marcus circled around, knocking 2 more gunmen unconscious with a heavy fence post. "Where is everyone?" One of the remaining gunmen shouted nervously into the darkness. But then a voice that made Marcus's blood run cold echoed from the shadows near the barn. "Enough games, nephew." Robert stepped into the firelight. He was holding a rifle to Pete's head. "Drop your weapons and come out where I can see you," Robert called, "or your friends start dying." His bluff was called. Marcus stepped into the light, his hands raised. Katherine and his father emerged from behind the house. "Excellent," Robert said with a cold, triumphant smile. "Now we can finish this properly." "Robert, why?" Jay Thorne asked, his voice heavy with sadness. "We're family." "It came to this because you stole my inheritance." Robert snarled. "You should have made me stay, made me work the land like you did. This is your fault." "So now you're going to kill us all, Marcus asked. "I'm going to clean up loose ends. The fire will be a tragic accident. The whole Thorne family gone. No one left to contest my claim. Except us." A new voice cut through the tense standoff. Marshal Patterson stepped out from the trees, followed by 6 armed deputies. Their rifles all aimed directly at Robert Thorne. The marshal said, his voice like iron, "You're under arrest for arson, attempted murder conspiracy, and about a dozen other crimes." Robert's face went white. "Marshal, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly. Dr. Henderson brought me some very interesting evidence tonight. Seems those witnesses against Marcus were paid to lie. We found the money, and the letters proving you hired them." The thin lawyer tried to run, but 2 deputies tackled him. Robert's other gunmen dropped their weapons. "But how did you know to come here?" Robert stammered. The marshal looked at Katherine with open admiration. "Miss O'Brien sent word that there might be trouble out here tonight. Smart woman figuring out your whole plan." Katherine smiled a real relieved smile for the first time in days. "I told you we should start playing offense." As the deputies loaded a sputtering, defeated Robert and his men into wagons, Marcus put his arm around Katherine. They stood together, watching the smoking ruins of a part of their home. They had won, but the cost had been high. "We can rebuild," his father said quietly, as if reading his son's thoughts. He stood beside them, leaning on Pete, a true family forged in fire and loyalty. "Together," Katherine added, taking Marcus's hand. Marcus squeezed her fingers, his heart full. He looked from the smoldering embers of the past to the woman beside him, her face illuminated by the dawn of a new day. The nightmare was over. Their real life, the one they would build from the ashes, was just beginning. 212 Force.